Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists got it correct. This is Tom Navolis, your host, and I have my good friend and business partner in so many other ventures, none other than Mr. George Brennan. How you doing, George?
I'm doing fine. Thank you, Tom.
Good. Well, you know what? Uh I'm really excited. I don't know about where, but I'm excited that I get an opportunity to talk to you about one of our favorite ventures on trying to educate people. And wait, let me stop there a second. How's the weather out there where you are in Long Island?
It's sunny, cool, crisp. It's a typical autumn day.
Yeah, isn't that great? But you know what? We've got late November and December coming on, and I'm watching the weather forecast for the Northeast US and even into we're seeing some things here in the Ohio area where we're going to be seasonably a little bit warmer until that January timeframe. But I'm seeing New York and Northeast is really going to get hit hard. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, and I think the Farmer's Almanac is also supporting that.
Yeah.
Over 300 plus years or however long they've been around, they're more accurate than, a local meteorologist with all their forecasting satellites and other equipment. So,
Yeah,
not that they get it right all the time, but
yeah,
they know something about the leaves, the pine cones, the acorns, the squirrel tails,
right.
etc. All old,
Yeah,
whether it's folklore or Indian observations, I'm not sure, but you know,
yeah.
the science.
But I've been reading some reports with that, George, and one of the things that you and I worked on a lot was what is sustainability, what's going on with the things like the power grid, and I shared with you that the U.S. power grid faces higher risk of blackouts during extreme weather, high demand, and that's what this study shows. And I went to the study and was really digging into it. What is that going to mean for the US?
Well, the U.S. is putting itself, and it's been creating this for quite a while, um, in basically compromising the reliability of the grid.
Yeah.
So the primary purpose of the grid system is to deliver available and reliable and inexpensive power. And how they go about doing that and providing that mix historically have been dictated by capitalistic driven resource availability, geographic components. So you may be in a coal mining area, you're going to use coal to supply your fuel. Fossil fuels, natural gas, hydroelectric, nuclear power later evolved. But the basics of hydroelectric, um, fossil fuel, coal, then petroleum, and now natural gas, wood, all were suppliers of energy, not
Mhm.
just electricity, but energy. So, and its different forms. And in the last couple of decades, the introduction of renewable energies. Let me clarify that weather dependent renewable energies
Thank you.
has been added into the mix with the auspice of the sun and the wind are always there and a constant and are free, and therefore we should utilize them, along with ideological driven components and the politicization of green movement have put us into a precarious situation, which is what you're alluding to with the upcoming winter and the ability for the grid to be able to supply to consumers and businesses the ample supply and and reliable supply.
Yeah, what's interesting, and I don't know that a lot of people here in America really realize, is that the coal was 46+% of our energy supply, electricity in particular. Now, what was interesting to me was that prior to, right at the Obama administration, our grids were more local. They were more state generated environments, even regional, as I recall. But then Obama wanted to nationalize the grid for all these different reasons. And some of it was by virtue of the lobbyist and what you were saying, trying to move energy across the state lines in a different manner at a different cost basis. But what we're concerned about, at least I am, in talking with you today and looking at this report, is the fact that we may end up with the travesties as happened in Germany and other places in Europe, with now that coal down to 16% and being more dependent on these unreliable renewables. That aren't people going to freeze their butts off? Aren't they going to take and not get what they need
Had
for?
that happen.
Yeah,
No, it's happening here. It's happening in Europe. It's happening in Australia. It's happening in a lot of places. The the rush to bring online renewable energies and to interface them into the grid and to prioritize them, which is really the important aspect of it. You have to understand that the hierarchy, don't want to jump around here, but I do want to touch on the Obama point, because what they tried to introduce, and it was overturned, was the Clean Power Act.
right.
And basically, they were going to regulate the emissions from all these generation stations, whether it's coal, fossil fuel, gas, et cetera, and they were going to regulate them into oblivion. They're still
Right.
trying to do that.
Yeah.
And so because that did not get legs, they've instituted and brought in from different levels, both regionally and on a state basis, regulatory processes. So, on the regional, we have the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, the RGGI. I think it compromises 11 to 13 states in the Northeast.
Right.
Basically, they're trying to reduce the input of fossil fuels, whether it's coal, petroleum, natural gas, down to comply to carbon emissions.
Right.
And, beyond the EPA, beyond any other standards, and force the issues of renewable energy. Within the states themselves, you have what are called renewable energy mandates. And here in New York, where I reside, we have back from when Andrew Cuomo was governor, and it may have increased, but 22% of the energy had to be purchased or supplied to the utility companies had to be renewable energy. So they did that in different forms of, renewable energy credits and other carbon credit trading and cap and trade scenarios to be able to effectuate that. The bottom line is part of that was they were given priority and guaranteed rate structure, which allowed them to sell it at a higher rate, and that it was something the utility company would just nominally pass on to the ratepayers. So whereas in New York State, buying hydroelectric from Niagara Falls or St. Lawrence River or Canada at 2 or 3 cents per megawatt hour and bringing it downstate for maybe another 2 to 3 cents and having something between 5 and cents of the purchase power for that cost of energy. And then you would build in your infrastructure costs, the delivery aspect of it.
Yeah.
And along with other taxes, but you would probably get it up to 14 to 17 cents per unit. But what they're doing is they're going right to that retail rate, guaranteeing that to the renewable energy people. And they are, when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing, the utility company has to buy that from them.
Yeah,
But they also have to maintain standby power or backup power so that when the wind fails or the sun goes down or a cloudy day or snow, they have to be in that capacity to bring it up and fire it up. So in essence, you're having a dual system of energy and you're paying more for it.
yeah. Some of the things too that I'm reading in that article that from John Solomon's site was that we are more dependent now on natural gas, and we're seeing that it's moved into that position that coal used to be, into that 40+%. But with that, I think that the crazy part, and they learned this down in Texas from last year with the storm that came through there, is that there's insufficient natural gas to take and really keep the coal plants up when everything that you just said on all of the sun and wind goes down. And worse is that if the coal plants are now sucking all that natural gas, there's nothing there for home heating. And I think that the travesty of that is, wouldn't you say, more up in the Northeast in relationship to that?
Well, to add insult to injury, yes, you're correct. And, gas has been great because it's reducing, the emissions that everybody was complaining about with coal. And, the fracking revolution really brought in a cheaper, more inexpensive gas. It's cleaner and it's readily available. And the resources we have in this country are, had made us independent of any other sources of energy.
Right.
That used to be a national security issue. But what the regional operators and the states are doing is they're creating moratoriums on new gas pipelines and any kind of transmission infrastructure other than renewable energy.
Yeah.
So a solar farm or a wind farm may get fast tracked to have their transmission brought online. And I'm oversimplifying this. There's a full regulatory process to bring it on, and interface into the grid.
Right.
But the reality is, like here in New York, they've put a moratorium or banned any kind of gas pipeline infrastructure. So even though we now have abundant resources of natural gas or liquefied natural gas, which is important for areas like New England that it needs to be shipped in, it's just not happening. So there, it's kind of creating a crisis that maybe they're trying to do that so that they can resolve it. I don't know.
Yeah,
But I look at the pressure on the coal, shutting it down where it's our most abundant resource and our cheapest form of energy.
and the
And we
cleanest
do
coal in
possess
the world.
technology.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have the lion's share of it in the world.
Right.
And we have the technology, we possess the technology and we could drive that technology bubble even further to keep it clean and keep the emissions down, and make that, a very inexpensive and affordable process.
Right.
The downside of coal is
We're
that
down to our last minute in this segment, George. So.
okay, coal generates a lot of heat that goes to waste. It's one of the problems. If you had it in an inner city, which is what China's doing,
Right.
You would be able to take that heat and use it to make steam or other types of energy, which is what they did in New York City for years.
Right.
So,
Yep.
but really what we really need to do is prioritize our energy resources based on our natural resources and where they are geographically.
Yeah, that sounds good. And we'll pick up on that as we go into the next segment, as well as I want to talk about something in New York and New York City that I saw about snow plows and garbage trucks and some of the interesting investigations into that and the failures that occurred with that as well. So I think we're going to have a lot of fun, folks, in the next segment with that. So come on back to Samuel Adams Returns, because yes, those anti-federalists, they got it right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this second segment of Samuel Adams Returns, and I'm here with my good friend George Brennan. We always have a good time together remotely and when we're together. So, hey George, I left off that last segment with a fun thing that I don't want to belabor too much, nor do you. But I saw the article, and it'll be in the references at SamuelAdamsReturns.net. That being it looked like New York City was trying to take and bring in electric snow plows and electric garbage trucks. And I'm reading this article on it. Absolute total failure, obviously, because the garbage trucks would have to keep moving all the time, and they don't. And then the snow plows are definitely underpowered. And geez, New York City doesn't get any snow. So I just thought that, just a quick comment about the whole electric nonsense. And then let's get back to what we're really important on people needing to know what the heck's
There's so
going on
many
with the grid.
aspects, so many aspects, Tom, of electric vehicles, especially industrial type vehicles, even the Ford F-150s that are built to be, America's workhorse, are having difficulties making the range.
Yep.
The 300-mile range. If you're in New York City, 300 miles is, plenty. But if you're starting to haul snow or ice or, tons of garbage, it creates a different animal.
Yeah.
The other aspect of it is that New York State decommissioned its nuclear power plant
Yep.
at Indian Point last year, and that was 25 megawatts, 25 gigawatts, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
of power, which was about 20%, 15 to 20% of New York State's power, and about 25 to 30% of New York City's, which is now having to be replaced by hydro from further away. And, the retransmission of it is adding to the carbon mix. So they've gone backwards on this one. And also the reliability, the dependability. But, the infrastructure is not meant to handle it. And it's going to come down to, are you going to supply your consumers, your residents with power? Or are you going to supply industry and infrastructure, hospitals, first response, departments, etc.
Right.
Or what? And this has happened in Germany. It's happened in Australia where they had to make a decision.
Yeah.
And, in California, if you'll note, that they were requesting people not to charge their electric vehicles because they were having brownouts last
Yeah.
year and this year.
Yeah.
So, and
go ahead.
the advent of the smart meter will allow the utility companies to
Right.
figure out who's going to get power and when, and how much power. So,
Right.
they sell it to you as it's, replacing the manual meter readings, and it will be able to evaluate peak usage and all that, and be able to help them
Right.
supply power better, which is in essence true. But if they don't continue to operate the grid in a reliable, affordable fashion, those are going to become reality game changers.
Yeah.
Who gets power, and ironically, we're paying a lot more because of renewable energy mandates and purchasing it. And the people that are most affected by it are the people on the lower socioeconomic scale.
Right.
Many people in the poorer classes spend as much as 40% of their disposable income on utilities.
Yeah. Well, go to
That
that.
rate goes up 30 to 70% or doubles, which is what they're predicting. That's going to mean a lot of problems.
Well,
So,
with that, my dad brought that, some of that up when we were talking about the statistics here. And the interesting thing that he brought up, him being 95, he goes, well, if the grid can't sustain it, and he also being, really smart in electricity and electronics, he goes, let's think about refrigerators. Let's think about, how many people were forced to electric heat in new homes, especially what's going on there in New York. But just that alone, if there's a long-term power outages like there was down in Texas, you're starting to sit here and go, what happens with especially those that are in that income range? What are you going to do? Your food supply goes away, your food goes away, and now that's really become disastrous. So we have major things that we're potentially looking at in this winter cycle that I don't think people are anywhere close to being aware of.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you project outwards too, in New York City and New York State here, they are mandating that all stoves be changed over, or any new stoves, no gas stoves can be sold on it. They want electric stoves. They want electric heat pumps to replace gas heating and oil heating. Now, I can it, I can speak from experience. I survived Hurricane or Superstorm Sandy,
Yep.
where we had 5.5 feet of water come through, and it fried my electric panel and meter. I had to replace my gas meter, water meter, everything, because it was salt water.
Right.
It affected the infrastructure. There was a backlog. We waited months for electricity because there was a backlog on transformers, which still is going on right now.
Wow.
Because China is the primary manufacturer of that. And and everything here. I was fortunate. I have a gas stove, but my neighbors had electric. So I did all the cooking and boiling water, and I was the most important guy in the morning because I was able to make coffee.
Yeah.
So everybody came over with their thermoses and filled up. And other people had electric fireplaces, or whatever. But again, having that redundancy, at least being able to supply gas in my house, allowed me to be able to eat, boil water, and make coffee. My refrigerator didn't work. I
Right.
didn't have any lighting, and my boiler was misused as a submarine. So, and I had to wait for parts, and I had to wait for boilers and hot water heaters and electricians, electric panels, etc., before we restored services. Now, if everything was electric, I don't know how that would impact everybody, but
Yeah.
that's a story for another day.
Yeah.
But yeah. So they're making this moratorium, and if we were to expand this out further, Tom, the bottom line is, and this is happening across the world. It happened in a couple of provinces in Australia where they bankrupted the utility company. The state took it over, and they blew up the fossil fuel plants so that they couldn't go back there.
Yeah.
And they became dependent on wind and solar. And they had droughts, they had fires, smoke and whatnot, and desert storms, and they weren't able to produce power. And it created shutdown of industries, rolling blackouts and brownouts to the residents. But the state had to make a decision. Do we send power to the residents so they can have air conditioning, or do we power up the businesses?
Right.
They chose the residences. The businesses closed up. Some of them relocated to other provinces, or in a couple of cases, they moved outside of the continent.
Yeah.
So, so unemployment, it just has a whole cascading effect.
Right. Well, when I was thinking about it as well, is that because I was looking at all of the new emissions that and the rules that are coming down. I mean, they're really looking at just straight off the Institute for Energy Research and all these Obama rulings that are going to go into effect between now and 2030. And it's amazing to me that people aren't standing up and screaming and trying to understand that how coal is going to only become 3 to 8% of what the U.S. power supply is before 2030, and they're shutting down, 30 gigawatts, 60 gigawatt coal plants here and there. Fortunately, we're not blowing them up because we learned from Germany. Germany had to restart their coal plants. They had no other choice. So when we're looking at all of those regulations, and you're talking about industry, my concern is with all of the Clean Air Act, what's that going to do to the steel industry in the US again, George? I
Yeah,
just,
well, electricity just isn't, there is no substitute for the coal or natural gas or oil, especially when it's energy intensive industries
mhm,
such as steel. And then you take it further, steel is required for building infrastructure,
yep,
for pipes, automobiles, tractors, heavy, whatever. It touches so many aspects of our whole national GDP. So without that, we're going to end up importing it from China, from India, from wherever else. So it's the analogy I use is what we went through with the waste industry, especially with plastic and garbage.
right,
So, and in New York City, we were spending $700 or $800 million a year for recycling program, and it was separate staff, separate vehicles, separate segregation of glass and paper and aluminum, etc. And initially, the recycling market was paper had a value to recycle.
right,
Aluminum did, glass did. And then as time came on, as we saturated the market, there was no value.
right,
So they started paying to get rid of it. So they would ship it out of state and into old coal strip mines and bury it, let it be somebody else's headache
yeah,
down the line. Then
right,
they started shipping it overseas to China and Africa and the Asia, etc. And it would end up in the waterways
yep,
because the Africa and India didn't have the resources to properly manage landfills. And so when you hear about plastic in the ocean, it's not that it's coming from America where that might happen a little bit, but basically because of poor, waste management. And all we did was not in my backyard.
right, yeah,
Pass the buck down the line. The same thing is going on here with the energy industry and clean air and everything else. China and India have basically free passes from the so-called Paris Agreement,
yep,
COP26, which was a voluntary agreement that the United States and other countries entered into, not treaties, just volunteer agreements to reduce our carbon emissions and
right,
our pollutants and greenhouse gases. But China and India are what they are called developing nations, so they got to pass on it. And all they had to do was saying, yeah, by the year 2035 or 2045 or 2060, we'll try and get down to 30% or
right,
whatever.
yeah,
But meanwhile, I've been to China. I've watched them building coal-powered plants
yep,
in every new city they're building, and they're building a new one every month.
yeah,
And they have coal burning plants in the middle of the city with no filters, pure
yeah,
pollution coming out, reminiscent of Pittsburgh, circa 1950 or 60.
yeah, yeah,
So, the smog, the pollution, but they'll deal with the pollution when they have to. Right now, they're getting very cheap and inexpensive energy where they need it the most.
yeah. We're
And
down to our last about 50 seconds. So when we're taking, we're going to move into the next segment and maybe tie in some of the things that you're also working on and what ESG, DIE, EDI, well, also some of those other acronyms, because when we look at the globalist touch and how that impacts through banking and infrastructure and all of that, that is touching our whole energy environment. My big concern is going to continue to be, as we have this conversation, is what may happen, especially in the areas of the US that we're living in and we're seeing on that map and in that report that can definitely have serious problems, especially for those that are aging. So come on back into the third segments where George and I will continue this conversation. See you then. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this last segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Yeah, those anti-federalists, they were really smart guys. Hey, this is Tom Novolis, and I have again George Brennan. He's still hanging in there with me. Thanks, George. And welcome back to this last segment. You know, just to keep it going on the grid, uh, it doesn't segregate very well anymore. I mean, when you have power outages, it's the bigger chunks of areas get whacked. And with that, will tie in the continuation of what we were talking about relationship to what does this mean on a whole environmental basis in general, but then why aren't corporations, what is the tie into ESG type stuff in corporations not fighting back? Why don't we have real people standing up like real men and going, this is wrong for our country, this is wrong for the citizenry, this is wrong for our customers?
Yeah, well, couple of things. I mean, what we've been dealing with energy and what's going on in the corporate world is they're being bombarded. For years, we had, for the lack of a better term, it went from ecology to environmental issues within certain organizations and industries. It then became the catchphrase was sustainability.
Right.
Sustainability, and you know, I've done a bunch of speeches on this, but sustain is to maintain your life, your livelihood, be able to continue in the future.
Right.
What they've done is they've really tied sustainability, and they being the environmental movement, the academia, government, forces, media, to bring it into an environmental component and then tie in carbon and greenhouse gases, for the lack of a better term. And it's really kind of a ethereal thing. People don't understand greenhouse gases and how important they are to our atmosphere
Right.
and universe. They don't understand carbon dioxide or carbon and how important that is
Right.
in our life cycle. We are made of carbon and oxygen and
Right.
water, and our food is all carbon driven. And you know, so when you look at it, and I'll kind of lead into it, the United States is blessed with so many natural resources, and because we have such great and ample and available natural resources, it drives our economic engine. It's what powered the Industrial Revolution and commerce. And it allows us to supply inexpensive and reliable power, which helps improve the quality of our lives and our standard of living. And it also allows us to be independent, and it's a national security aspect of our country,
Right.
which helps develop our sovereignty. And these are being attacked. Basically, the carbon aspect, which is part of the ESG, the environmental component, is now pushing down regulations on companies to be responsible for their impact on the environment, but they're really fine tuning it to the carbon aspect of it, or CO2. And there are three parts of it, what they call scope 1, 2, and 3. Scope 1 is basically the energy you use in your industry, whether it's, if you're a delivery business, it's the gas and the electricity to power your office and whatever it might be. The scope 2 is the energy you use that you might purchase from a power company or solar or wind or whatever, but that is an energy component. You have to report on that.
Right.
Scope 3 is the up and down of the supply chain on anything that you touch, whether you're buying widgets or selling widgets, even to the point of if it's through Amazon and it gets delivered, you have to report on the emissions and the impact on the environment of all components there. And in essence, no matter what size company you are, it's a paper tax. You
Right.
now have to throw resources, people to track it, report it, analyze it, and try and improve upon it if you can.
Right.
But you're now being forced to be regulated by all different departments of the government. And
Yeah.
it's at every level. It's the US, state, it's regional, it's local.
Yeah.
And people are being brainwashed into thinking this is something that's going to improve the environment, but nobody ever puts a cost equation to it.
But let me
So,
grab you on that one right there,
yeah,
because I think that's critical for every individual that you know is listening to this, is that you're seeing a lot of food prices going up, or any type of price on any commodity, anything you're using, whatever. It, you know, they can drive all these other components to it, but a lot of it is, as you and I have talked about for years, is that hidden bureaucratic tax that businesses have to absorb. And I want people to be very clear on that. That is working for the businesses are working for the government with no reimbursement. And so product costs go up because, to your point, you got to increase the people to do the reporting, and the reporting does not benefit the business. So therefore, it increases the cost of your final output. I, People
yeah, no,
don't want to understand that.
yeah, well, and there's several components to this. Some of it is legislative, and
Right.
that can be dealt with by, really getting the ear of your politicians and presenting the case. But the real component here are the regulatory agencies
Yes.
that are taking laws, creating laws and rules, and then enforcing them through penalties and whether it's civil or forfeiture or whatever it might be,
Yeah.
financial. Now they're trying to enact it through the internal revenue. They're developing what are called the climate core, which are going to be people going out and carbon footprint and everything you do, from where you go to how you heat your house to whether you have energy efficient windows or doors, insulation, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't want to waste too much time. I want to kind of jump
Yeah.
into it.
Go
But
ahead.
the Supreme Court is going to be reviewing. Uh, Trying to think of the name of the act right now. Oh my God. We'll have to come back to it, Tom. But
Yeah, that's okay.
there's a Supreme Court going to be reviewing the Chevron case.
Right. There you go.
That is allowing Congress to subrogate its duties in making laws and allowing agencies to make the rules and enforce them.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a big play because there's checks and balances that are out of whack there.
Yep.
Social component of ESG is a driven by both diversity, equity, and inclusion components, critical race theory, and a few other things like Black Lives Matter, which all kind of boiled up to the surface and are starting to show their true colors and being evaporated. But the DEI is very powerful. The government is embracing and endorsing it, and a lot of times they're using it in their ability to do business with any government agency by having to produce DEI scores. What's really driving the DEI scores is the LGBTQ community. And
Interesting.
basically, if you look at their scores, and you'll see what happened with Budweiser and Target and other organizations, is they're trying to please a very small segment of the population to get those scores and favorable ratings. And it's really permeated through funding, banking, insuring,
Right.
regulatory, bid contracts, etc. So it has to be revisited. A lot of organizations are walking away from it, but a lot of them are doing it publicly, but privately they're hiring people for DEI and ESG. it's populated through all the government
Yep.
organizations and academia, and it's sort of like uh, a flesh-eating, uh, disease. It's
Right.
going to eat, it's going to consume itself. It's already starting to happen in certain organizations. And then the G is governance, and what's happening, and it's already happened in Europe, is they're trying to incorporate environmental, social, and regulatory components into the business world so that they have to start reporting to the SEC or different, Department of Labor, Department of Transportation, all these different areas to be even further regulated.
Yeah.
And they've already instituted it. It started out with sustainability over in Europe, and they had the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standard Board, and now they've incorporated ESG into it, and now the SEC, which has already started promoting environmental components into corporate reporting, is now trying to put in the social and the governance and have even more regulatory components. And what you're seeing is redefining of sustainability to what used to be people, planet, and profits is now, people, um, not even planet, well, planet to a degree, but, more Gaia, more Earth Goddess,
Right.
diversity, equity, inclusion, and then reporting to a point where they're really looking at equity, that profitability is no longer a concern. And that's where they're really driving. And it's becoming a corporate rating system
Yep.
based on how you perform socially and environmentally. They don't care about profits.
Right.
And
Well, it goes back to that redistribution of capital.
well,
I mean,
sure.
that's the whole gig, is that, when we look at these globalist billionaire oligarchs, if you want to call them that, and they don't give a flying rip as long as you get them buying up all these different things. Bill Gates buying up farms for all the different reasons that he is. And then when you take and you look at those that own all the banking systems, so your point on driving that, capital becomes very difficult to get for small, medium, and even in your Fortune 1000s. So that I see that being driven very, very hard, as some people want to call it, that reset type stuff. But yeah, go ahead. But I mean, that's what really captures me on this whole thing, is that they're trying to take the capital and turn everybody into just little gnomes running around, slaves doing their will.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're now forced to have to comply to a social rating system based on ESG ratings,
Yeah.
and if you're a faith-based organization, your goose is cooked. They're
Yeah.
going to bury it.
Yeah.
And they're coming at us from every different direction, whether it's internal revenue, climate core, all different types of regulatory components.
Yeah. So
And the problem here is
we've
that
got a
this
minute
is
and a half,
evolved.
George.
Yeah, it's evolved, and now it's evolving very quickly, where it's disruptive. And you have all of these consulting companies, all these NGOs that are pushing this stuff and trying to help you into distributing your own wealth, your profits, you know, um, and having to comply. And compliance is really, being scrutinized and being put out of
Right.
business.
But
So the
you know what's
the power grid.
yeah.
You know,
So what's really interesting to me on this, George, I'm going to take the last minute here and really want to thank you for being on the program today, if we don't get a chance otherwise, is that when I was preparing to have the conversation with you, I was going back from the early days of what was driving the American Revolution. And there was so much written around the area of commerce. Our commerce was being destroyed, our liberties being destroyed, our personal property was being destroyed by what was happening there in England, Great Britain, and how those oligarchs, how those mercantile system was taking and just wiping us out. And that caused the American Revolution as much as anything else. Go ahead. You got 5 seconds. Any response?
Yeah, no, give me liberty or give me death.
Amen, brother. You know, Sam Adams clearly understood about that. Our founding fathers wrote a lot about everything that George was speaking to. Learn your history, folks. It's the time for liberty or death. See you next week.